Oline and salutations to the Truth Core, whoever and wherever you may be on the planet these days. I'm here on the 23rd of March 2022 with an additional note to the series I did in 2020 titled Mythology 101. So I began that series in October of 2020. About a year and a half ago. And recently I had occasion to listen to the first talk, not the introduction, but the talk entitled Mythology is Racist. So the lessons in that course are numbered 1 through 14, and they're in a playlist, and it would be better to listen to them in succession. So why am I coming back to that subject now after a good many months? Well, as I was listening to the first talk, I realized that I made an error. I botched the language in an instance when I ought to have been extremely precise, and I wasn't. So I'd like to clarify that and add a couple of other comments about the value of that course, if you don't mind. So first of all, about my error, it concerns the word Semitic. It's not Semitic, it's Semitic, S-E-M-I-T-I-C. Now, if you've listened to that lesson, you'll know that I read the titles of the 13 volumes in the Mythology of all races. And one of the volumes, I forget which one it was, 5 or 6 maybe, is called Semitic Mythology. And that is wrong, actually. They ought not to have titled that volume in that way. So what do you find in the content of that volume are the myths of the Near East, of ancient Babylon, the myths of ancient Persia, Iran, and Iraq, and the area of Canaan, Palestine, Syria, what is today Lebanon, Jordan. That whole area of the ancient Near East is covered in that volume, but not Semitic mythology. And I made the mistake of using the term at some point, Semitic races. But you see, Semitic is not a designation of race. It does not denote race. So it is quite wrong to say that the ancient peoples of the cultures with labels such as Sumerian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Akkadian, Hurrian, Hittite, Canaanite, and many others, that those cultures were Semitic cultures. They were not. They were Sumerian Middle Eastern cultures. You see, Semitic is a language designation. It refers to 3 languages, Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic. Those are the Semitic languages. So to be correct and exact, Semitic mythology would be that body of myth that is written in those 3 languages, period. That's it. So the cuneiform tablets of Babylon, of Nineveh, and other places, which tell the story of Gilgamesh, are not Semitic. They are Sumerian. And the distinction is extremely important because the many peoples that lived in that ancient area, thought to be the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, meaning between 2 rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and stretching into northern Iran, and in Iraq, stretching toward the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, stretching downward to the Arabian Peninsula and to the Gulf of the Persian Gulf. All of those areas were inhabited by many different peoples who spoke dozens of different languages with hundreds of different dialects. But the Semitic language group is unique, and it ought not to be confused with the other cultures and languages. And unfortunately, that is what the authors of this volume of the Mythology of All Races did, to identify the many different cultural and linguistic variations of myth in that vast area with the title Semitic is entirely wrong. So the term Semitic cannot be and should not be used as a comprehensive term for the various mythological narratives in that particular volume with that word as the title. Nor can it be used, as it often is today, as a racial designation. Well, what are the Semites? Who are the Semite people? Well, strictly speaking, they are people who speak the Semitic languages. And they could be, in a sense, of any number of races from the ancient Near East, you see? So the racial designation of Semitic is truly unfortunate. And I might add, it's also inescapable due to the common use in a weaponized form of the word anti-Semitic. So, as I explain in the course, if my memory serves me correctly, literally to be anti-Semitic would be against the Semitic languages. It would like being, let's say, anti-Euskara. So Euskara is the native language of the Basque people, and you could say, I'm very anti-Basque, and that might mean something because I would be referring to that people by their racial identity. But if I say I'm anti-Euskara, that's odd, isn't it? That would be literally saying that I'm not against those people, but I'm against the language that they speak. But unfortunately, this is one of the many twisted aspects and twisted and deceiving connotations of the word Semitic. As a famous man from Canada once said, anti-Semitism wouldn't exist if Semitism didn't exist. So the issue in this course, which I introduce here in the first lesson, is the issue of Semitism. Define Semitism. It's the ideology and worldview, including values and morals, that have come into the world uniquely through the expression of the Semitic languages, Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic. And of course, that would be the ancient so-called sacred literature of the Hebrews, and by extension of the Christians, because Christianity is simply a variant or an iteration of Judaism, and then by extension again of the Arabic peoples, Arabic-speaking peoples, that is to say, peoples who speak a Semitic language. So that is all in all a big bowl of extremely confusing spaghetti, but I just want to correct myself for the way that I misspoke in that introductory, not the introductory talk, but lesson number 1, mythology is racist. What else can I say? Well, I haven't had occasion to revisit that course since I finished it, but I did so today briefly. And as I was reflecting on the material and the presentation, the organization, and the main points that I attempted to make in that course, I once again came to a conclusion which might be considered invalid because it's a conclusion that I make regarding my own work. Of course, it would be remarkable if someone else drew the same conclusion, wouldn't it? But my conclusion is that you, as someone with an open mind and a willingness to learn, who chooses to look into the genre of creative mythology and comparative mythology, could not do any better than taking this course. By the way, I also made another error, or I misspoke, when I said creative mythology. So my genre and the illustration of studies in the genre you see in this course is comparative mythology. But sometimes I say creative mythology, and that's an allusion to Joseph Campbell, who was, let's say, the founder or godfather, if you will, of creative mythology. And so I belong to the second generation of creative mythologists founded by Joseph Campbell in the late 1980s. And as the follow-up of what Campbell proposed, what I attempt to do is to expand, elaborate, and implement the program of creative mythology, which he outlined in his book of that title, but which he himself never actually implemented. Anyway, to return to the point that I was making, only a comparative mythologist, not just an ordinary mythologist who specializes in the myths and sacred narratives of one particular culture, such as Japanese, Greek, Aztec, Chinese, Polynesian, no specialist could present you with the overview and the conclusions that I present in that series of 14 talks. And actually, I don't know if there's anyone in the world who could do that today, because to my knowledge, there are no academically recognized comparative mythologists living today, coming out of the university system. Correct me if I'm wrong. Mircea Eliade, who was more properly speaking a historian of religions, but also a comparative mythologist, and Joseph Campbell, Scott Robertson is a name that comes up, wrote a book on comparative mythology, and so did a couple of other authors whose names escape me. One of them was German, but I think they're all gone with the wind. And honestly, I don't know if there's anyone today who stands as a qualified professor with a PhD in comparative mythology. If you can find one, please refer him or her to me. I would be most interested to know who that creature is. So the point is, if you could go to college and do 4 years and then do a postgraduate study to get a PhD in comparative mythology today, if you could do that, and I don't think you can, you still would not have anything better than what is in this 14-lesson course. So there I am blowing my own horn, you could say, but nevertheless, I believe it's true. And so if you can make it through the entire course, I thank you for that, for your determination, but I really want you to reflect on the takeaway and on the main points that I make in that course, namely that we are living on this planet, and we have been for a long time, in the midst of a war between two narratives, the Semitic myth and the Sofianic myth. And the reason why the world at large doesn't know, almost knows nothing about the Sofianic myth, whereas the Semitic myth is by far the most influential religious and belief system on the planet is because the proponents of the Semitic myth have so arranged their affairs and so influenced the world that they don't want anyone to know about the competing myth of Sophia, which comes to us through the Gnostics and the great teachers of the mystery schools. It's exactly the same thing that you see in the mainstream media. They present the official narrative of the authorities, and they do everything they can to censor and exclude any counter narrative. So the Sofianic myth is the counter narrative to the Semitic myth of the Abrahamic religions. That is a very great fact. And that is one of the 4 or 5 essential takeaways that I would like to offer you through the effort and organization that I've put into this course, Mythology 101.